for freelance work, I'll go to studios. So I've been working a lot with the studio Mighty Oak in Carroll Gardens, who they're really awesome. They're like a female-led stop motion company. And that's been really fun. We've done like some commercial projects and then this music video recently. So it's been a good mix of doing more like hands-on animation with them in studio versus like writing development time on my own here.
What's the difference between the two, would you say?
There's pros and cons. I mean, with my own stuff, it's like my own ideas. So in some way, I feel more pressure about those because I hold myself to a high standard and I want it to be really good, and it's very vulnerable sharing your own work with other people and asking for approval. Whereas working on other people's work, I don't take criticism personally because it's just part of the job, and the director will have their own opinion there. So in some ways I like that because it's lower pressure, and I always end up learning on those jobs because I'm trying something new maybe, or just following another director's vision, and it's cool to see how other people, work on their visions or what they want.
What type of differences have you seen working with other people?
This is very specific, but one thing I notice is that I, for whatever reason, never think about camera movement. I always think about like still frames, and other directors just have, especially working with live action directors, they have a lot more like camera movement in their storyboards and in the shots. And so that's a challenge to achieve in stop motion because it's either like actually animating the camera or animating the shot in post to look like it's moving. But that's always fun to see that because it's just not something that I gravitate towards or usually work into my own storyboards, and then realizing what a camera move in a scene or shot can achieve emotionally or tonally is fun to think about.
Do you think studying, observing is very important?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting though. I think it's a combination of observation and intuition, because once you're in the shot, I think it's important to observe and like do research ahead of the shot, but then once you're in it, sure you can like reference that shot, but then you kind of just have to follow the intuition. So when I teach or when I direct other animators, or even when I'm doing it myself, I always tell people take videos of themselves doing it. So like look at a video of the move and then do that move with your own body, because I think it helps you break down the motion. Like even the motion of sitting in a chair, you forget, do you put your hands down first? Do you just put your butt down first? Like what's the actual breakdown of these really simple movements that we do every day? And so doing it with your own body, I think, can really help. And then once you've done it in your own body, then it feels more like it's almost muscle memory. So when you're animating it, you have that memory of that motion inside you.
That's a cool way to think about it. And just having to think about creating each individual movement.
Yeah. With my students, when I was teaching an intro to animation class, we'd always have a day. Walk cycles are a very typical like learning block in an animation class, learning how to walk, which again, it's like we all know how to walk, so we should know how to animate walking. But there's very specific things like most people put their foot down heel toe, and that might not be intuitive if you've never broken that motion down in your head before. So I'll always make everybody stand up and walk in slow motion and then ask everyone to point out like, okay, what are you seeing with that person's leg? How is it bending? Where's the transfer of weight? What are their arms doing? It's fun to break it down that way.
How do you think you went about finding your style and your voice?
I think it started intuitively, just what I was interested in. I think each project, especially each personal project that I've done, I always whether it's super conscious or subconscious, have a goal to learn something in that process. And so then my work has changed and developed in that way, where like I'll learn something on a project and then have that as a foundation for the next one and set out to learn something new. But in terms of my voice, yeah, people have asked me that before because I tend to explore sexuality, intimacy, vulnerability, and I think especially when people think that my work is raunchy, they'll be like, why are you interested in this? And what's interesting is that for me, it doesn't feel raunchy. Like I explore relationships and sexuality, but I'm not making porn. Like the focus of what I'm making isn't about the actual sexual acts. It's like about all the emotion and connections surrounding that sometimes. And I think perhaps part of why I'm drawn to that is because it wasn't necessarily something I grew up watching or reading, and a lot of people, I think, discover those types of relationships on their own as opposed to being modeled in the media. And so it just kind of came from a desire to talk about these things that I think we're all talking about privately, but then put them in a more public setting. Yeah, that's part of it. And it's not, my work isn't always about sex. I think it's more often just about intimacy and vulnerability. And those are, whenever I am watching a TV show or a movie and it has a very intimate, personal, vulnerable moment, that's the type of content that I enjoy the most. So that's also part of it, is just being inspired by other people sharing those types of stories and wanting to share that and connect with people that way.
It's very human.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that's what I like about animation too, is that because you're not showing actual humans, it's like a cartoon character or a puppet in the case of stop motion, there's almost this like protective wall that I think allows audiences sometimes to engage with more vulnerable content because they're not confronted with an actual human going through this. Like they kind of let their guards down because it's maybe like a goofy looking character or cute or something. And so then when you hit them with like very real human moments, sometimes I think maybe it hits harder, or if not hits harder, people are just more open to receiving it because they're not seeing like an actor's face staring at them. I think when an actor is doing a nude scene, at least I'm more conscious like that actor is doing a nude scene, as opposed to an animated character. You don't think about it as much because you know that their body is fake, so you're not like worried about that person's, or maybe not even worried, but just like you're not thinking about that person's nudity in the same way. It's less sexual, I think, because it's just showing the human body, and that's my goal with it too, is not necessarily to sexualize the nude figure, but just like show people in those states occasionally.
What's it been like as far as the professional world working as an animator? I tend to work more in the independent scene of film as opposed to the industry, if you will. And it's been mainly a positive experience. I really like working in the independent scene. While sometimes it can be frustrating to not have enough money or not have enough team members to help you out, I think creatively I've found it more fulfilling. And I've built like this community of artists, or I'm lucky to be a part of a community of artists here who are really just friends. And then it's so much fun that we all just like work on each other's projects, and it's really fulfilling, I think, in that way. Do you think there's value in having constraints in the type of work you do?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like creativity can function better in a box sometimes. Like I see it with my students sometimes. With a final project, the prompt will just be nothing. It'll just be like, take what you've learned this semester and make whatever you want. Some kids really like that and have ideas already, and then other kids who are really good and have done really great work throughout the semester flounder for a while because they don't have a wall to bounce against. So I think partially maybe that's why I like the collaborative work, because
the director has a vision, and so those are the constraints in place. Yeah, honestly, the more difficult people to work with are the ones who are like, do whatever you want. Because oftentimes I think they don't actually mean that. Like, they think they mean that, and then you show them something, and they're like, oh, actually, that's not what I wanted. And it's like, okay, well, we could have saved a step if you had thought about it a little bit longer and tried to communicate what you wanted, as opposed to just letting me do literally whatever and then, being surprised and not liking that. So, yeah, I like when people give me parameters.
Do you ever put kind of a constraint on yourself with your personal work, or how do you kind of find that vision?
No. The short answer is no. I don't necessarily put constraints on myself, and instead I'll just kind of wait for the idea. And I think I'm not a big daily journaler. I know some people are, but instead I just have like notes in my phone, and anytime I think anything's remotely funny or interesting or moving, I'll just jot a couple sentences down. And so then if I'm looking for inspiration, I'll go back through those notes and wait for something to jump out at me and be like, oh yeah, I could expand on this idea. Or it's usually more about expanding on a feeling and then shaping it around that.
How do you take it to that next, from a feeling to something tangible?
It's a hard question. I don't always know. Like, it can change, or I think that's just the hardest part of the process, because I don't have like a set guideline of how I do that every time. Hopefully there'll be a specific image that comes to me where I'm like, I can see this scene, especially if it's going to be a film. It's like, I want to be able to see a shot in the film. And then knowing that, then maybe that's where parameters come in. I'm like, okay, this is the shot I really want to get. This is what this character's wearing, or this is this prop that I see in this scene, or this is the setting. So then how does that expand, or what could make sense for that thing that I really want to be there, to be in it. But it's also a lot of like walking around, throwing my phone against the wall. I like lock my phone away, because if I have my phone next to me when I'm trying to write, I will end up on Instagram in 5 seconds. So sometimes I'll give my phone to my roommate or a friend and be like, I'm not allowed to have this for an hour. Yeah, sometimes I'll doodle or sketch. But I'd say also, like, I really like books. I really like collecting books. And so sometimes if I'm stuck, I'll just like flip through comic books or art books that I have. And whether it's more of like a shower thoughts thing of like just having my mind be distracted by something else, I'll come up with an idea, or I'll see something in these books that I love and see an image and be like, oh yeah, that really inspired me a while ago. Maybe I can work this idea into this story somehow. That's like I said before, like an excuse to try something new. I think maybe that's also potentially a parameter that I set up for myself, is if I have a goal, if there's a skill that I want to learn, trying to work that into the film.
Seems like kind of the visual first a lot of times, and then the story built based on these thoughts you've gathered.
Sometimes. I think it's more of a ping-ponging. Like, I think it's first idea and like written idea, but that's like a nugget, like a really small seed. Then maybe some visual, then back to the writing, then it just like keeps going. Yeah.
It's cool to think about that process, because I think a lot of times it's not conscious.
Yeah, it's a hard question, because but I think it can be helpful to be forced to say it out loud, because then you can recognize patterns that you've done and be like, oh, when I'm stuck next time, I can try to do that thing that I told Christian I was going to do.
And how about the teaching aspect? How has that been for you?
I really like it, which I was surprised by. It's great. I like it I don't want to be a teacher as my career, but I like it as part-time work, because I think it keeps me on my toes. And I often think about my teachers and the ones that I liked and the ones that I didn't like. And I think a lot of them, the ones I didn't like, were old and out of touch and showing us offensive artists that, you know, could have easily been replaced by more current people doing inspirational things. So that's fun, is to like show them people working in the field today that are maybe different than what they've seen before. And as cheesy as it is, like, they're so talented. So sometimes seeing what they do, I'm like, that's so cool. I want to try that. You know, so I just try to create this space for them to explore.
Do you feel like that was something that you had when you were a student?
What I really liked most was the critique culture at our school was very big. We spent a lot of time, sometimes we'd spend the entire class. We wouldn't actually do work in the class. We'd come to school with our work and then spend 6 hours critiquing everyone's pieces, which was exhausting, but I think it was good to force us to talk about our work and also think about each other's work deeper than just like, I like it because that's a pretty color. It's like, well, what is that color doing? Why does it make me like it? How is it making me feel? So I like talking through ideas and work, and I appreciated that. But at the same time, I think there was a lot of, like, a culture that I didn't like, which was this idea of really like breaking people down to build them back up. And some of that I think is fine to like rework habits, but part of the critique culture would sometimes also just be like making people cry, and that I don't think is productive, to tear people down where they feel bad about themselves as a person as opposed to just focusing on the art.
That's interesting to think about, the self-value tied to the art. Do you ever think about that in your day-to-day?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really hard. I think art is subjective, so when someone doesn't like it, it feels personal. And also, I usually draw inspiration from my personal life and my personal experiences. I think I've gotten better, though, as I've gotten older. And it also depended on who I was talking to. Like, certain people, I could tell didn't like it, but I could also recognize that maybe it wasn't for them. Like, if a 6-year-old straight dude didn't like my piece, I'd kind of be like, that's fine, it's not for you. I kind of like the experience of going to a movie with a friend, and then, you know, maybe I have an incredibly moving experience in the theater, and then we walk out and that friend is like, that was trash, I hated it. And I'm like, how can we have had such vastly different reactions to that? And I respect you as an artist, and we usually agree, like, that's crazy. And so hearing that about other work has helped it be easier for me to be like, it isn't personal. People just have different tastes, and tastes are subjective. Yeah, but sometimes I'll forget to, like, I think it's that thing where you look at something so many times you can't see it anymore. So that's also happened where I'll share a film and then, you know, people like to comment on, like, this one film, the characters have kind of like lumpy bodies. And I feel like I only know that because so many people have told me, they're like, I love their lumpy bodies. And I'm like, they're lumpy? Like, I was trying to make them smooth. I guess they just became lumpy in the process. But yeah, I feel like that's always a fun part, is sharing the work with people, because you get to see it through other people's eyes and see things that maybe you didn't even realize you were doing consciously.
What would you say to someone who's starting out in animation? What advice?
Okay, so I have 2 fallback pieces of advice for emerging artists or animators. One, I've stolen from Issa Rae. This is not my piece of advice, but I read the quote where she's talking about networking in particular, where she's saying everyone is always trying to network up and like connect with people above them, which can be helpful, but those people aren't your peers. You're not going to connect with them in a strong way necessarily, and you might be out of your league. And whereas if you network more laterally, and what I like about this is it doesn't feel like networking. Like I was talking about my community of peers, we've all been quote unquote networking with each other, but it's just we're friends and we really admire each other's work, and so it's fun to work together. And because we all started on the same level, when one person has a success, if we're working on each other's projects, they bring everyone else up with them. So
as opposed to just like reaching upwards always and being out of our comfort zone. We're all kind of like growing continuously together. And it's a really amazing feeling. And then it's also, I think, less competitive. I think there's a lot of unnecessary competition in the film world sometimes, but it's a team sport, so it's good to get along with your teammates. So that's one thing. And then the second piece of advice I often give based on my own experiences is I think I've heard other filmmakers give advice to indie filmmakers where they're like, just go make your film. Like, if you want to make a film, just go do it. And I think that that can be great, but it's also a pretty privileged standpoint. Like, filmmaking takes a lot of time, and especially animation, and a lot of money, because time is money. And so you can't always just like go out and make it. And maybe if you do, it's not going to be the best version because it's not enough budget or not enough people or not enough safety precautions, whatever it is. So I think instead, how I like to look at it is like, just get ready to make it, so that like get everything ready, get your script ready, get your storyboards ready, get your production plan ready for your dream execution of this project, and then seek opportunities that will help you make it. So that when that opportunity comes along, you're absolutely ready to jump on it, but then you get to make the best version of your film because you've had your plans in place and you didn't just run and gut it, which isn't always the most successful way to make it. And I think particularly with animation, it's just so much time that I personally don't have the stamina to just make things completely by myself with no money. Like, I want help and money. So it can be worth waiting for.
How would you say your state of mind is these days? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel artistically satisfied?
Some days not. I think this summer or last year was a little tough because of the pandemic. Work was really slow, and it's hard for me not to tie my artistic value to the amount of work I'm being offered. As a freelancer, I think your life depends on it, and then also it's a matter of being desired. So that was kind of hard because even though I think now I can recognize that it was due to the pandemic, it was difficult for me to be motivated on my own. Even though I had free time to work on my own stuff, it felt hard to do that because I felt like, do people care about my work? But this fall, on the bright side, things have really picked up, and now I'm very busy. And sometimes I think being busy can help motivate me for the personal work because the free time feels more precious, and so you're kind of revved up already, so I'm in that creative headspace to work on my stuff. So I feel like lately I've been really inspired, and I've had like a lot of ideas and a lot of things I want to explore, which I'm excited about, but I also know that that goes in cycles, and so I think as I get older, I just try to be more patient and just remind myself that things move at their own pace, and even when it feels like maybe nothing's happening, I know that I'm slowly continuing to grow and evolve as an artist, and that is proven true whenever the outside stuff is offered to me. I realize I'm ready for it because I've been continuing to develop on my own. So just trying to keep that in mind even if it feels slow. And knowing that when I'm busy, it's not necessarily going to last forever.
Yeah, it is a cyclical thing. I think for a lot of creative people, even if you are busy, it's like a cycle.
Yeah.
Projects beginning and ending, and
right. Yeah, it's definitely a cycle for sure. I think, and it's seasonal too. I think the fall into the holiday season is just a busier time because there's I have a bunch of holiday painting commissions coming up. People want gifts this time of year, whereas summer people are out of office more, so it's slower, and maybe I just want to be out of office more too. Nothing is permanent. Everything is temporary. Try to be very zen about it, but it can be hard when you're
in the low point to recognize that. Yeah, recently bought a physical calendar, which I haven't had in a long time, and I've been trying to track like more my moods. I think more just attached to my mental health apart from my art too, just to show myself that like I have a color code system where I'll be like, this is a blue period where I'm more blue, or this is a yellow period where things are really well, so that when I'm in that blue period, I can physically see like, oh, this isn't forever. Like I had a blue period at this point and then I got out of it. And I think in those moments, I think part of why I started getting more into comics, I just like the medium, but they're like small, bite-sized, sequential stories. Like it's very similar to animation, sequential imagery, just with a bunch of frames, bunch less frames. So I feel like in the past year or so, I got more into them because when things were slow, I would just like give myself a night and be like, just make a nice comic, like connect with yourself artistically, connect with yourself in a story way, and then make something, and then I usually make something I like out of it, and then it's a good little bite-sized like revamp, you know?
Yeah, not everything has to be a huge undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I've had to tell myself as well.
Right. And I think that's hard in social media age because if you're on Instagram, you're just seeing everyone's accomplishments. You're not seeing the in-between stuff. And even if this one person took 7 years to achieve this thing, you're seeing their success and then someone else's success. And so it looks like everyone's achieving things in a very short spurt of time. And so it can be hard not to feel like you're moving at a slower pace. But what's always fascinating about that is then running into people who are like, oh my God, it looks like you're doing so many things. And I'm like, really? Like, that's not what it feels like. So remembering that that's all, if not a lie, it's just relative. And yeah, so not everything has to be like a huge accomplishment or a big project, like you said. Those little things I think are just as important to keep you charged